Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Truly Great Life podcast. I'm Alana Yvonne, and today we're having another RAW DMC. That is a raw, real, deep, meaningful conversation. If you missed the first one, please go check it out. And today you'll be hearing a conversation I had with a good friend and blogger, Jackie Hafter, who has an amazing story to share. And it's one that I'm sure you'll find, as I do, very inspiring. And I'm not going to give too much away, but Jackie is a mother, a solo parent, a cancer survivor, and her story is a difficult one to hear, but also very inspiring to hear. So, just as a little trigger warning, there is mention of addiction, abuse, and suicide. We don't go into any details, but just be aware that that is mentioned. But the focus of our conversation is really on how she got through extremely challenging circumstances and situations and was also raising four children while going through the challenges that she'll talk about. So I will leave it at that. I hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you or anyone that you may know would be interested in coming on the show for a raw DMC, be in touch with me, trulygreatlife.com and Truly Great Life on Facebook and Instagram. All right, here we go. Hey, Jackie. Thanks for
Hi,
coming on.
Hi, Alana. How are you?
I am hanging in there. How about you?
Thank God. I'm so grateful
Thank
to be
God.
here.
I'm so glad that you're coming on. So, thank you for coming on to this Raw DMC. And for those who are just joining us for the first time, who didn't see the first one, these are conversations with amazing people that have messages or stories about challenges or changes that they've gone through, and have a message or that story that they want to share to hopefully inspire, motivate, and encourage you, the listener, out there in internet land with whatever you are struggling with or wrestling with or going through. And so the hope is that by amplifying voices like Jackie's, who has an amazing story, which I'm so excited for us to get into, that you, dear listener, will feel not so alone. And maybe it'll even normalize whatever you're going through in the sense that we all go through so much stuff. So these raw DMCs, raw, real, deep, meaningful conversations are not scripted. We are just going to see where this goes. But I'm super excited to introduce everyone to you, Jackie, my friend Jackie Hafter, who I've known for, I guess it's going a little over 2 years at this point.
Yeah, yeah. So, Alana,
Crazy.
thank you so much for having me. This really means a lot. This is my first podcast, so bear with me.
Oh, we're
But
bearing with each other.
yeah, but I will tell you, Alana is definitely the catalyst to me finding my truly great life.
Oh,
Um,
well, we're gonna dive into that later for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm so honored that you asked me to share my story and the journey that I've been on. So to tell you a little bit about myself, and my journey is one of survival, resilience, and definitely my goal is to hopefully inspire others to find hope, and know that does exist even in the darkest of times. So to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a mom of four amazing humans. Gabriel is 22, Judah is 20, Viva is 19, and Sophia is 16. I'm also a widow, a solo parent, and a cancer survivor. Um, and in the last few weeks, I also am now a blogger. Thank you, Alana, for your inspiration. And I have finally launched my blog called Anchor of Hope, which is going to share a lot of these stories, and my perspective. Hopefully, also give people the understanding of hope through resilience and ultimately survival.
Yeah, well, that was a beautiful introduction, Jackie. You do have four amazing kids. I know two of them a little bit more than the other two, but it's that's one of the things that when I met you and we started to get to know each other was just your story is inspiring, even if the details of the challenges are completely different from, let's say, challenges I've had or anyone else. I think that you know, you exude this hope that you're talking about, which I know is now, the anchor of hope, which we'll, share in the notes and everything, how people can access this at the end. But can you, to the whatever level you're comfortable with, just because people are new to you,
Sure.
what can you share about your story of you said survival?
Sure. So, Hashem, God has given me many challenges over time, but interestingly enough, uh, I guess as I progressed in the different challenges, I stopped asking why. So I'll start with like my first big challenge was my oldest son Gabriel was born with a craniofacial birth defect in 2002. We did not know that he had a birth defect until he was born. Um, that birth defect is called Treacher Collins. It affects the bone structure in his face. So Gabriel's had 17 surgeries. Um, Three of which were really important for his airway and are characteristic of Treacher Collins. So they break his jaw, we create space, what have you. So in that I mentioned about his airway, he also was on a feeding tube for 5 years. So first kid, slam right into challenge.
Sorry,
Didn't know.
Jackie, just for those who may not be familiar with the name of his condition, this is, am I remembering correctly that this is what the character in Wonder, the book Wonder and then the
Ah,
movie Wonder, is that the
that is
same
correct.
or okay.
That is correct. That is correct. And Gabriel actually starting in middle school when that book came out,
Yeah.
he started teaching classrooms around the country via Skype. That's starting to
Which is
age him,
going away now, right?
right? So it's starting to age him. But he started teaching classes about his birth defect. And actually in sixth grade, he created a whole curriculum using the book Wonder.
Wow.
So many have now not necessarily heard of his birth defect, but they can relate to it based on the book and the movie Wonder. And I have no problems with being Julia Roberts.
Yes.
It was the mom.
That is a good point. That is a good point.
Yeah, that kind of got me through the movie because I cried through the whole thing, but I was like, but I'm
Um,
Julia Roberts.
right. Okay, that's who they cast for this. I can relate. Yeah.
Exactly. I'll take it. I'll take it. She plays me
So that's
well.
that for, that's a serious that changes a family dynamic or as a young couple or as a new couple with the first child. I'm imagining that puts the strain or a
It,
challenge.
it's definitely a challenge. I really had to learn very quickly all the ins and outs of medical. Um, it got to the point where the doctors would say to me, like, you should have been a nurse. Just, my nature is to research and, to really be very hands-on. So I got to know a lot pretty quickly. Um, and, and speaking of challenges, I can now look back and I can look at it from a lot of different perspectives. Gabe gave me a strength that like I did not know existed. I, Never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that I would have the strength that he was able to give me, and strengthened in who he was like so or who he is. So I always say now, and this has really been characteristic since he was born, which was a blessing given the challenges, is he's the most chill person I know. Like voice of reason, chill person I know. His babysitter, who started with us when he was 4 months old and she was 15, she would say, WWGD, what would Gabe do? Because Gabe would just
Oh.
walk into the room and own the room. He still does. Everybody loves. So
Wow.
he really brought out a level of strength that I did not know was possible or even existed. Um,
Hmm.
within myself. So I'm always super grateful to him for that.
So
'Cause
you're talking about a strength like as a mother, right? Like the mama bear strength, or how would
the
you, what
the
kind of
mama
strength is
bear
this?
strength, just the strength in, like, he was on a feeding tube for 5 years. I was living by the clock. I had to feed him every 3 hours. In the beginning, he was fed all night long. And it took me about 5 months to connect to another parent. I really struggled tremendously, because I couldn't find somebody who kind of had a like situation. I
Mm,
talked to this parent whose kid was 18, and she was like, "Ah, it's fine. Like, he'll have a bunch of surgeries and he'll be good." And like, I
okay.
right, but like, as an infant, I didn't know if he was going to live. I didn't know if he was going to die. I didn't know what surgery looked like. He had his first one at 3 months old. Um, and I just didn't know what it would look like. And in the beginning, I really wasn't sure if it would like morph into something different. And like I said, I didn't know what the, mortality in it was.
Mm-hmm.
He has had complications with every surgery. So, just the strength in that. I can tell you something that kind of exemplifies that strength. So when he had his surgery when he was 18 months old, when they broke his jaw for the first time, we were in Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. He ended up having complications. He was on a ventilator for 11 days. And we lived about an hour and a half away. So
Mm-hmm.
there weren't so many people that were visiting, but we did have a few visitors. And I would stop them at the door and I would say, if you're going to come in here and you're going to cry, don't cry. Cry outside. Gabriel, I don't care that he's on a ventilator. I don't care that he seemingly doesn't know what's going on. He will feel that emotion. So you need to come in here as a cheerleader and not as a crier. Um, and like, where did I even
Right, that
know that?
insight. Yeah.
Like, how did I even figure that out? But my gut knew that he needed to feel that positive, emotion, and not the crying emotion. So that's a good example of strength that I just didn't even know
Wow.
how I manage that. But and it's actually advice I give to every parent that is like, that has a kid going into surgery that asks me. I say two things. Number one is, however your kid goes in is how they're going to go out.
Mm,
So try and have them go in as calm as they can. As Gabriel got older, he wasn't able to use any type of Valium type drug, any kind of calming type drug. So he had to go in, with no help, with no
wow.
assistance on being calm. So I would say to him, say Shema, just say Shema over and over again.
Can you just say what the Shema is for anyone who's listening
The
that may
Shema
not know?
is the Jewish, the quintessential Jewish prayer, the core of our culture that says that there is only one God.
Right.
So and it's also something that is often said in times of crisis.
Yep.
So that was one bit of advice I would give parents is,
Mm-hmm.
however they go in is how they go out. So if you can keep them as comfortable and as calm as possible going in, when they come out into recovery, and you as a parent is going to go into recovery, you're going to find that they're calm and quiet. If they go in screaming and you're crying and they're seeing you cry and they're scared, they're going to come out that same way. So that was my number one advice. My second advice was, anybody that comes to visit them, make sure, or even with yourself, if you're sad, or it's okay to have those emotions, but as the child is healing, separate yourself and
Mm,
keep it just positive and happy and uplifting. And I think that, that's just a tremendous tool for when a child is healing. I mean, anybody, in reality, anybody. I can tell you another story. He wasn't walking after that surgery, and he had walked into surgery, and he was on a rehab floor, and I would walk with him around the floor,
mm-hmm.
and he would scream. And why was he screaming? Not because he was in pain, but because he was frustrated. He knew, like, I should be able to do this. Why can't I do this? And I would just ignore the screaming. And, we'd look at like the other babies and, whatever, things were on the wall. And
Right.
the nurse said to me, "Oh my gosh, look." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, he's not screaming. And I was like, oh, funny. Look at that. He's not screaming anymore. I had blocked out the screaming because I knew what it was about. He didn't need to be attended to. He just needed to get past that frustration. And that screaming stopped once he realized he could do it on his own.
Wow. I mean, these all sound like really, they don't sound obvious, right? I would think like for a lot of, um, my kids haven't had challenges at this level medically, but just any challenge, right? I guess it depends on like where the parent is at in terms of how they handle that stress of seeing their kid in distress or any kind of challenge. And it sounds like out of the gate with your first kid, you already had this wisdom, this innate wisdom of how to approach it. Was that something that you learned because of the history of his medical, interventions and everything, that you were always like that, where you knew like the way he's going in is the way he's coming out, or like, not check yourself, but like keep yourself separate from this and keeping it positive? Like, was that something you went in from the get-go, like, out the gates, or is that something that you learned through not trial and error, but I guess just experience? Because it sounds very, yes, and wise. And I just know, one of the things I'll talk about freely in my recordings is like I screw up all the time as a parent. And my challenge has been to just kind of own it and grow from it and, just being human. So what you're describing sounds like superhuman. I mean, human
Um,
and wonderful. But I'm just wondering if there's anything that you want to share about, like, was that a process, or is that just something that came out?
I'm gonna say it was a gut instinct, but I know where the instinct came from, and that's clearly from Hashem. I never really thought about those moments like that, but now that you're asking me, it was just something I just
You just knew.
did. Yeah, just knew. So where else would it be from,
All
right?
right, so let
Because
me ask you, Jackie, just so Hashem is God, it
yes,
means the name. So
yes.
when we say Hashem, we're referring to creator, source, one God. Were you religious at this time? What was your relationship with Hashem that you already had access to that kind of resource?
Sure. So I don't think at the time that I knew it was Hashem, but now looking back that you asked that question, I know it's
Mm-hmm.
Hashem.
Okay.
I grew up in a conservative home, more traditionally conservative. When I went to college, I was very active in Hillel. Um, that's where I, met my husband, and we sort of evolved. We went to Friday night dinners, and then once we got married, we had already kept kosher. Um, Once we got married, and probably around the time I got pregnant with Gabe, we started going to shul every Shabbos. We didn't live in walking distance, so we drove, and it was sort of a evolution over time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Until ultimately, when we moved to Las Vegas 17 years ago, we were fully Shomer Shabbat. We moved to a house that was in walking distance, and kept
Sorry,
kosher.
just Shomer Shabbat, for those who don't know, means observing Shabbat, where you don't drive, you don't cook, you don't use electricity, you don't do any work. Yeah. And
Right,
shul is like a Yiddish word for synagogue.
right, right. So, and we can talk more about where Hashem fits into all of this,
Yeah.
but just in relation to your question, I don't think at the time I had any clue where that instinct came from.
Hmm. So what is there more that you want to share with us about Gabe and that challenge?
Um, Now he's 22 years old. He's graduated from college. He's in yeshiva, which is an intensive Jewish learning program. And his birth defect is like very secondary to who he is. Um, thank God.
Amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So
So,
he's truly nothing.
so it can be very stressful when you go from a young married couple or an older married couple, just a married couple, to having a kid, right? You go from two to three, and you eventually went from two to six. So having had, the challenges of a kid who had the needs as Gabriel did, to then go on and have other kids, how did that, is there anything that you can share with us about the challenges just in general, raising more than one human being, raising two, raising three, raising four? It's a lot.
It, yeah, everybody always says it's a lot, but it's kind of like what I know, right? So, when Gabriel was about 4 months old, we did genetic testing. His mutation is a spontaneous mutation, so the likelihood of us having another kid with this birth defect is just as likely as anybody else in the world, right? So
Okay.
there's not the genetic component there. So Judah was born 22 months later. Aviva was born
22
months
months.
later, and and then we had a little break because I had three. Gabriel was the oldest. He was still in a feeding tube. He was still in diapers. Um, but that didn't last very long. And so I needed a little bit of a break. And Sophie's 3 years younger than Aviva.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think it was just like kind of all I knew, at that point. Everybody just sort of fell into place. I was blessed with good sleepers.
Yeah.
Maybe that was it.
Amazing. No, and now they're all launched, as we say. So when it comes to with your particular journey, your particular story and challenges, or why you're on here because you have a message of hope. Is there anything else related to your family that you want to share about the challenge aside from the medical challenges that Gabe has had, and of course raising four kids, that's a lot, or
Sure, sure. So I touched on the fact that I'm also a widow. So my late husband committed suicide in 2018. And that was after about 3 years of addiction issues. Um, so now I was kind of catapulted into another dimension of parenthood, right? So I'm not a single parent, I'm a solo parent, which is a very different scenario. Um, every single decision is mine, whether it's
I'm sorry, Jackie, just to clarify, you're saying that because of the addiction, it effectively rendered you as a solo parent. Is that what you're referring to?
well, the addiction, led to suicide, and therefore being a widow and being the only parent,
Right.
that's
Right. Is there anything from the time before he committed suicide that is part of the story that you'd want to share, or more about after and then being the only parent?
so once he died, I think I really evaluated, like, had the space, I guess, to evaluate what I had been through. And I basically spent 20 years protecting my kids. I was married for 20 years, but so at that point, Gabriel was 15 when Gabriel's the oldest, and he was 15 when his dad died. Um, so, it was protecting myself, protecting my kids, navigating an abusive relationship. But I don't think I really realized the magnitude of that until after he died, because that's where the survival came in. I was in fight or flight survival mode for years. And that's, all I knew how to do was survive. So I didn't have the space at the time to evaluate what was actually happening. I mean, I think I kind of surface knew, but was didn't have the space to take the time to delve really in deep. Um, abuse is really hard. We hear all the time how women can't stand up to their abusive partner, and don't have um, either the strength or the wherewithal, or just they're so riddled with fear, which I think is where I really like, was to make any kind of change.
Yeah, I mean, when anyone is in what they perceive as a survival mode, right? So it could be something like in your example, which was, one example of necessary survival, but then it can also be for someone else who might be listening and maybe just feels like they're surviving because of something else, but isn't actually in a threatening situation or in anything that's in danger for their family. When we're in that fight or flight mode, right, or freeze or fawn, right, there the brain is not getting the oxygen to be creative about and to process, because to process any kind of danger or trauma or situation where you're just trying to get through the day, that's all you have space for. Is it's very um my experience with this sense of being in survival mode is everything kind of shrank, like the aperture just kind of shrank, and it was like, all right, how do I get through this day?
Right.
I can't even think long term. How do I get through this day?
Or sometimes even this moment, right?
Yes.
A day
Yes.
becomes super long at that point. So it's just, every moment.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, for sure. So that fight or flight. And one of the things I was going to touch on, which you sort of touched on in the intro, was my sense of loneliness um, in this time period. So even, when Gabe was little, um, being that special needs parent, um, kind of propels you into a lonely space. Um, Obviously, anybody that's endured any type of abuse and what have you, I would imagine would have that sense of loneliness, right? Because you're in that fight or flight mode, and you're just so um, when you're in a dark hole, it's really hard to see past that, right? So
Mm.
one of the mantras that we always hear, and definitely something that I also live by, is finding the light in the darkness. But when you're in that dark space, it's really hard, to find the light. So um you do have that sense of loneliness, and then put in there becoming a widow, and becoming a widow in the way in which I became a widow creates a different type of loneliness. People don't know how to react. I'm not saying they should, but people don't know how to react. They don't know what to say. They don't, you know, uh, some of it is they just want to not be involved, because it's so traumatic. Um, so that creates a certain loneliness. I've even looked at like widow support groups. It's a very different feel when you're a widow that, God forbid your husband got sick and, many years of passing away, than when you're a widow based on a tragedy like this and can look back in your lifetime and, or the past 20 years and see like so clearly the abuse that went on. It's a different type of widow. Um, and it makes it very lonely. Yeah.
Right. I mean, any one of those would be a lot, right? We're talking about challenges and getting through challenges and how you found hope or strength, and any one of those categories, if you will, is enough to be like a lifelong struggle or something to work through and overcome, or however you want to call it. And it's like you had three of them, right? Between the challenges for Gabe's health, right? To being a mom for him and working through that and that loneliness, and then having addiction and abuse with your spouse, and then widowed by way of suicide, and then you mentioned in the intro about a cancer survivor, right? So is that, I can't count. Is that four? Is that five? I mean, it is
I,
it is just which is one reason that I just find it like incredible when, as I've gotten to know you, like, wait, what? Wait, what? And today, yeah, the way I see you, you're very positive and, you know, glowing, happy person. You're hopeful. You are, and you have this amazing attitude, and that's why I'm so glad you agreed to come on, because I think that most of us with just one way to relate to your story is like, I can't, it's too much. Sorry for the garbage day. You can hear it in the back. But like, so, what And I know we're going to weave in about God and how looking back, you can see, it's like looking back, we can see God's hand, right? And we can get into that maybe, or, but is there anything else that you want to share or you want to say about when you were in it that might be helpful for people who are listening to hear when we don't have the perspective or we're not out of it?
When I was in it, I wasn't able to gain perspective yet, I don't think. Um, yeah, I had those moments of like, like I said, like the gut instinct, but I don't know that I was totally able to really understand it. I think I was just, going through the motions of what I needed to go through. But I will tell you, when we talk about gut instinct, one of the things in the mantras that I said to my kids immediately when their father passed away. So, leading up to it. So when I had to tell my kids that their dad had committed suicide, it was shock but not surprise at that point, because they unfortunately had watched the demise. And there's a lot on suicide prevention, but there's not a lot spoken about. Sometimes you can't save them.
Mm.
So and the one thing that I said to my kids at the same time that I told them their father had just died was that this doesn't define you. And that was my gut instinct, was that I wanted my kids to have a future where I didn't want them to be the kid whose father committed suicide, even though they are the kid whose father committed suicide. If that makes sense. So I wanted them to create their life based on their needs and their future. And so I'm really grateful that that gut instinct, which I can now attribute to, Hashem and to God and God's guidance, but they've all been able to do that. They were able to pick up and live their lives as they needed to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. So you were able to be that, um, what's the word? Like you kind of set the tone, right? It could have gone a lot of different ways. You could have responded in a lot of different ways, but you set that tone. And I'm just wondering, like, is that something that you were also saying as much to yourself as to them?
So that's a really good question, and definitely something when I was kind of contemplating this podcast that sort of hit me, is that um, I don't think I said that to myself. And it definitely changed me. I mean, how wouldn't it change you? Of course it's going to change you, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, any challenge is going to change you on some level. But yeah, that really hit me when I was, thinking, about these challenges. I don't know that I ever said that to myself.
All right.
Um,
So,
and
yeah.
I'm not a victim type person. Like, you mentioned the what when, you've heard different challenges that I've had. I call it the ricochet effect. It's like whiplash, right? So you hit something forward, you go back. You hit something forward and you go back. And so, um, I think I sort of chuckle about it now, which is maybe not the right thing to do, but when I do, I try not to like, hey, this is who I am and these are my, challenges. But when I meet somebody, but as I unpack my story, I do see that ricochet effect that people have of wait, there's another thing,
But
and
wait, there's more.
oh wait, there's more. Right. So but I'm glad that, obviously, in my mind, I try and try and be a very positive person and not play that victim mentality. And from your description of how you view me, I guess I'm doing an okay job.
I would say more than okay. But I guess my question when you said that to them, were you already like a person who's kind of positive, like your disposition is that, just is that consistent with just how you are?
Um,
Or was
it's
there something that not personality wise, but that like was a you like you saw things more negatively, but you then learned how to see it more positively, or you always have been someone who sees things more positively, or do you know what I'm
Uh,
trying to ask here? Like, I'm just
yeah, no, I
wondering.
get it. I get
Yeah.
it. I think I spent most of my life riddled in anxiety and fear. So not that I'm a negative person, but I am overwhelmed with anxiety and fear. Um, that I've worked really hard on, and I see it lessen more and um, more recently. So I never want to. I never looked at myself as a negative person, but I will be very honest with like, oh, I think if you do this, like this may happen. Like I'm not like a sure free spirit. That's not me. I'm much more type A. But um, I think I aspire for positive outcomes.
Mm-hmm. That's nicely said.
So I think that supersedes the ability to be negative.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I am like, watch out for this, and make sure you put your toiletries in a Ziploc bag before you put it in your suitcase because you don't want it to explode.
Had those conversations. Yeah. I mean, that sounds like, mom talk, but I'm
Right.
curious if we can go back to, the time when you had to tell the kids about their dad and you told them that this doesn't get to, this doesn't define you and that you didn't want them to be that kid,
Yeah.
like you're that kid who XYZ, even though they are. And
Right.
so can you talk a little bit about how that's my dog scratching, sorry, how that played into your parenting, your transition into a solo parent, right? Because you then went from being in a difficult relationship to that relationship ending materially and then transitioning into solo parenting while raising these kids who were still young.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so whether this was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, I've always been really close to my kids. So I tend to think that I look at things very practically. And so maybe over time I shared too much with them, but they kind of always knew what was going on. Um, and I think that I also work really hard at explaining to them my expectation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, um, that coupled with they knew I wasn't giving up, even if the days were hard and, um, whether it was difficult because I had to figure out, you know, four people getting four different places, four kids getting four different
Yeah,
places dinner, and all of the things that come with parenting. Um, I and I'm kind of speaking for my kids, but I think that they never saw me give up. Not to say they didn't see me sad or distraught, but
right.
I was never giving up. Um, and I would like to think that they saw that, and that's what um, help propel them into the understanding that they were allowed to live their life the way they were supposed to live their life. They were supposed to do the things that, when my youngest was 9 years old, she was supposed to be doing the things that a 9-year-old was doing,
Mm-hmm.
um, kind of irregardless of how I was, managing everything. She was still supposed to do her thing. Um, and I think that that was sort of like that for all of them. Again, I'm totally speaking for them, so guys, if I'm wrong, tell me. Hopefully.
Yeah,
But
put it in the comments, kids.
but one of the things you said about, being an apologetic parent, I think that's also how I was. Like, I remember maybe I didn't say it to them, but I feel like I did. Thinking like, I don't have the playbook for this. Like, nobody has a playbook. Nobody, parenting in general, we don't necessarily have a playbook for.
Right.
We have a lot of books, but not
Yeah.
necessarily in your individual situation do you have the
Right.
playbook, right?
Right.
So I mean, maybe Google and ChatGPT can help
Nowadays, right. I
nowadays.
wonder how much
But
parenting advice.
but
Yeah.
I definitely did not have the playbook on how do you move forward? How do you move forward in so many different realms, right? Not just as a parent, but now I'm in charge of the household. I keep bringing up dinner, but dinner, I'm in charge of the financial aspect of it. I'm in charge of not just the household, but the actual house. You know, all of these things now fell on my plate. And because in the way he died, there was a lot of legal things also involved.
Mm.
So now that's all on me, adding to that loneliness, and that every day I have to pick up and, in the beginning, fear what I was facing, even though a big part of my struggle was my challenges of living with somebody with addiction was gone. There was so much more to still get through. Um, so yeah, just that acknowledgement, like I don't have the playbook for this. I don't I don't know what necessarily my next move is, and I'm not gonna it's not perfect. It's ugly. It's messy. Um, I think that rawness, as we say, helped.
The rawness helped.
Yeah. Because
Tell me more what you mean, please.
like just the fact, like the honesty and the rawness of it,
Hmm.
I wasn't walking around pretending like everything was great.
Nothing to see here. Move along. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right, right. I was real. Today I'm gonna go see the attorney and I'm scared. Uh, you know, um, Seeing the things I was fearful of and I was scared of. I think the rawness really, in my mind, again, speaking from my kids, but I think helped. Um, and maybe that did contribute to my loneliness, and that in my um interactions with other people, I don't know that they handled the rawness as well. And maybe that's where we saw the ricochet effect, or you know, one of the things I learned was like, yeah, like you have a village, and a village helps raise your kids, and we always talk about the village, right? But the village doesn't always show up. You have to call out to the village, right? Um, I mean, sometimes they do on a Friday right before Shabbos right before Shabbat with random things for dinner. A lot of,
Which,
um, they do sometimes show up, and I'm super grateful for those that have with the grape juice and some snacks. But I think that was one of the things I really learned, was that everybody says like we want to be part of your village and we're part of the village, but ultimately it comes down to you reaching out, which I was not good at. I'm still not particularly great at, but that's where I gained the understanding, and that wasn't until more recent, of leaning on God.
so before we go into, sorry about that. Before we
No.
go into, the more philosophical things that, is the fun part. Would you, just one thing that came to mind, and I'd love for you to just be like, no, that's totally not how I see it. But it sounds, one thing that came to mind is like, did you go from one situation where you were in survival mode with all that that entails into when their dad passed into a different kind of survival mode, but it was still that mode of like, how do I get through the day? Was there any room to process after, or it's really just a certain amount of time and certain things had to happen where you were still in a different kind of survival mode? And then now, once the kids were bigger, or once certain things were settled, or once certain things, then you were able to open up to reflect on what you had just gone through. Like, is that how did that kind of, because if someone's listening to this, right? Because the reason we're having these conversations is is because they're important and they're real and they're raw and they're meaningful, but we want the listeners, the kids at home, to make meaning out of what we're talking about for themselves, right? So to take what we're talking about and to try and put it through the lens of their own experience. You know, whether it's simple, it might be that they're more grateful for something because they aren't having challenges like what we're talking about, or they relate to it and now they're like, oh my God, she went through it, right? I think I shared with you that idea of like the waterfall. I think maybe I said this in the previous conversation, but like this image, right? The metaphor of the waterfall. And when you are in that waterfall, you're trying not to drown. But then when you're able to get onto the bank of the river and then you can like get out and you can look back and be like, holy cow, I survived that.
Mhm. Yeah, the waterfall is a great analogy. Um, no, it took a long time actually, and I think time is one of the things I struggle with in that why is it taking so long? But um, it's not linear, right? So
Yeah.
there's times where I feel like I've got this, like I'm doing it, I've got it, and then something happens or triggers me, and now I fall back. Um, that fight or flight mode lasted quite a few years afterwards. And I think that was more indicative of my situation. I don't know if that's everybody's situation. But it lasted a while. And I did therapy in the beginning, and I can honestly say I wasn't ready for therapy. I
What
really
do you
had
mean?
I had a wall up of I wasn't ready to open up those wounds. It was
Mm,
just too painful. So I went through the motions of therapy, and therapy became, like what was in my little world of like those 2 weeks or whatever, every week, every 2 weeks, that was stressful, which often was a result of the situation that I was in, but I
mm.
wasn't ready to open up into like the real painful part. And so after a while, I stopped therapy, and my son Judah, my second son, went to Israel in 2022. He ended up being there for 2 years, and he came home after 8 months of being there. And him and my daughter Aviva, at the same time, in the most loving of ways, looked at me and were like, "We think you need therapy again." And I didn't take it at all like, some people would be like, "How could you say that to me?" I In the most loving way, they were like, "I think it's time," you
Mm.
know? And so I've been in therapy since then, and definitely can open up those wounds. When you talk about being in fight or flight, I think, I mean, I can only go by my own experience. Fight or flight lasted a long time. There was a lot of fear, a lot of unknown. Um, so giving yourself a timeline is, to me, I don't know how that ever works. I'm looking back, we're coming up on 7 years since he died, and I'm like mind blown. Like I lost 7 years. It sort of is how I feel. But at the same time, like you said, like the waterfall, I can look back and see all this tremendous growth and all of these, great things that did happen, and um sort of that darkness that I came out of.
Anything you want to comment on about the fact that it's 7 years? Seven is symbolic, in Judaism and other traditions as well as, I don't know, it's interesting.
It is interesting. I think seven's also my lucky number.
Okay.
So I'm gonna say that 7 years is gonna be turning of a new leaf, and that what I've noticed in the last few years is, I've brought a few times about my connection to God, has been tremendous. I started learning with Judah when he was in Israel. He asked me if I would like to start learning with him Jewish texts or Jewish wisdom, philosophy, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that opened my world in a way I didn't know possible. Um, One of the things I really strive for now in my learning is to um, be confident in my faith, my faith in God and my emunah and my bitachon, my trust in God. And some people, may look at me and think I'm nuts considering the challenges that I've shared. How could you possibly trust in God? But I've always been a believer of what's meant to be is meant to, even when you're in that moment and you don't understand why it's happening. Once you come out of it, right, we're moving past the waterfall and you're looking back, you see that there really was a reason behind it. And it may take a very long time to realize that. But now in the learning that I'm doing and just the growth in that amuna and bitachon, that faith and trust in God, when something does come my way, I look at it in a very different way. It's also helped with my anxiety. And then I just kind of give it over to God. And
Mhm.
the path that I'm supposed to be on is the path that I'm going to be on. And so maybe my lucky number 7 is so that I could get to this space where not that things don't happen and that aren't challenging and what have you, but my whole perspective and my approach is completely different. I'm no longer in fight or flight. Like I can hands down tell you I'm no longer in fight or flight. And I can tell you that because when it was at its height, I could feel it on my skin. It was like my
Mm.
skin was burning and almost like prickly. And I haven't felt that feeling in a really long time, and I'm really grateful that I haven't.
That's
Um,
amazing.
so yeah, I think that's where I would look at my coming on 7 years. So thanks for pointing that out because, I think my initial looking at it was like 7 years, like I should be so much further along. Um, but I'm not listening to my own advice and that this isn't linear and it's you can't really put a time on it, like, oh, after this many years.
Right.
Um,
It's also, as I think we've talked about, offline, like you might make progress in one way, right? Or something is overcome, and then, the way I phrase it or think about it is like God's like, "Oh, you're so cute." Like, and then something else happens. Like, "Oh, that's so you think you're done with this." Like, that's so nice, but it's just like one more layer of the onion or one more level gets to be worked through.
yeah.
Like this, working through things or the growth um and the working in that relationship with source, oneness, divine, God, Hashem, whatever you want to call it, universe. But that's like a never-ending relationship, right? It's a never-ending um so it sounds like God played a huge this relationship you have with God and divine is a huge factor in ending the fight or flight
Yes.
state.
Yeah.
So if you were able to go back in a time machine, I'm just throwing this out there. This is just like coming to me. Like, how do you think, I know it's not really like a fair question, but if you had, would you say you didn't have, Emuna and Bitachon before when you were going through the difficult times? Or you weren't cognizant of it
I think I wasn't aware of it. And I think really what the catalyst was a small piece of attacking my anxiety
what
and
do you
how I
mean?
did it. So I had tremendous anxiety driving. Like
Okay.
that, like guys, riding his bike next to me, and I can like visually see hitting him, flying over the top of my car, like just things that just didn't make sense. And this was literally every time I got behind the wheel. And my therapist had said to me, start just like basically a broken record of gratitude when you drive. And it was things like, I'm so grateful that the tree is green. I'm so grateful that, the view, and I'm so grateful that, my seat warms, whatever it was. But I would do this recording in my head of
Mm,
gratitude. And all of a sudden one day I realized I'm not worrying about all the things about driving. The anxiety was gone. So that initial working on gratitude sort of led to, or I want to say was the catalyst towards this understanding of faith and and trusting in God. Like, essentially, I was getting from point A to point B without being anxious, and I got there safely.
Mhm.
And that was really in the hands of God. So it was like mind-blowing, like truly mind-blowing. Um, and so my whole perspective shifted from that, just learning to get rid of the anxiety of driving. And that allowed me to work on so many of my other anxieties. And I think it became a point where, like, sort of anxiety dissipated. I'm not saying I'm not an anxious person, but the debilitating anxiety I would have every single day about every little thing
Mm.
has dissipated. Um, and at the same time, I'm working on building that faith and that trust in God. So it's allowed me to now, if I have an anxious moment or a fearful situation, I can now give it over to God.
That's really big. So, I mean, you mentioned that you were observant on some level before you even had children.
Sure.
And so I'm wondering, how would you describe how your relationship with God changed?
Sure. So I'm glad you asked that question, because there was a big shift in our whole family, because Shabbat was the one time that their dad was home and interacted with them. And then as the addiction progressed, he isolated us. So now we didn't go to shul, we didn't go to synagogue, we didn't go to shul, we were home. But Shabbat was like a tremendous shift that happened after he died, in a lot of reasons, in a lot of ways. And what ultimately happened, there wasn't a male figure, which has a lot to do with the family unit and how Jews observe Shabbat. So now that wasn't there. My boys were 14 and 15, but that's really hard to put all of that on them, even though some of it was sort of put on them, to be the male figure in the house. So what ultimately happened, we were all on our phones. We were all on our phones and on Shabbat. And the one thing that I held to, well, two things that I held to, but one thing I held to was that nobody was driving on Shabbat. That I was craving so hard to keep my family together.
Hmm.
And Friday night dinner, Shabbat lunch, like, Shabbat was the only thing that I knew that nobody could go, if they weren't driving, nobody could go anywhere, right? Like, we didn't have play practice, and we didn't have this practice, and we didn't have, so it was the one time that I could keep my family together, and I so desperately wanted my family to stay together. We went from 6 to 5, and we had to create a new, what 5 was like. And the only thing I knew I could do to possibly keep that together was to keep us together on Shabbat. So that was my rule. Nobody drives. If you wanted to walk to a friend's house, or you wanted friends here, my door, everybody knows our doors
Hmm.
always open to friends. And I'm grateful, but that was the one thing that I held on to. And and not to say that I didn't get pushback. Um, my kids in middle school were in a secular private school, and so they had friends doing all kinds of things on Friday night and Saturday, and they had to miss it, even though at home we were in our phones. It wasn't fun, it wasn't enjoyable necessarily. It was one thing I held to. The other thing that I didn't realize the impact of this until this past Hanukkah,
Mm.
is that I always lit Shabbat candles. No matter what it was, I cried my eyes out, lighting Shabbat candles. It was a real struggle for me to light Shabbat candles, because I always lit one for each of us. So I was lighting 6 candles. Well, now there was only 5 of us. And in
Mm.
such a tragic way and such a traumatic way. Why did I have to keep lighting 6? And I had a lot of issues with it, but I still lit that 6th candle. And there's a lot of Jewish wisdom about, not taking out light. So to have taken away that one candle. We had this big, beautiful candelabra that I used to light on all the time, and I stopped and I started lighting on just little simple tea light candles, but I still lit my 6 candles. And this past Hanukkah, my kids gifted me a new candelabra with 6 candles. They all knew about this struggle with the 6 and the 5. I've done a lot of learning on it. And they gave me a new candelabra with these 6 candles and a beautiful note that explained to me that even in those darkest times, they recognized that I held to my commitment of bringing light into their world every single week. And like,
It's beautiful.
tremendous. So, we don't realize, what we're doing. And I say, like, I have these gut feelings and I just, go with my gut, but it's really like, I think ultimately where Hashem is guiding me. And to know that I had such a positive impact on my kids for something that we all struggled with so much, which was that Friday night, Saturday, family time had looked so different, was really tremendous.
That's really something, Jackie. I mean, it's in Hebrew we call it nachat or nachas, right? Like this, I don't know how you translate it, like
Like a
a
pride, like
like a
being
pride, but not like you just like it's like when you know that, oh, those seeds I planted, or
right.
like I didn't completely, you know, miss the boat here, or they got something when didn't even. Can you? I know it's a little off topic, but I'm so curious about lighting 6 instead of 5. So I know you're saying that we have something in Judaism about this idea of we don't take away, we don't
Right.
diminish the light, which is why we now follow for Hanukkah the idea of starting with 1 and building up, as opposed to Shammai, who was like, no, let's start with 8 and go to, right? Am I getting that right? But what is it when it comes to, in your case, being widowed, and we light for, the spouse and the kids?
Right.
What did you learn that might, I'm just so curious what are we supposed to do? I know you say you light 6, but then you learned about it. I'm so curious.
I think what I learned was, just that concept of not taking away light. Um, I don't know like specifically, but I mean, I guess, as hard as it was for me, it was like, who am I to extinguish his soul? Because that light and those Shabbat candles, can be exemplary of our soul. So
Hmm.
I'm lighting for myself, I'm lighting for my husband, I'm lighting for my 4 children and their soul. So like, what right, this is my own interpretation, not something that like somebody taught me.
Okay.
What right did I have to take away his soul, even though I struggled so hard with what things he did to me?
Mm,
Um, and so I don't know, it was one of those like gut things that I just, even though I struggled with it, and there were times where I don't like to use the word hate, but I really hated lighting that candle. I
mm,
still, um, and if not for any other reason, probably for my kids. Because there was a
right.
lot of things that I really struggled with continuing to do, but I did it for my kids. And I don't regret any of it. I think, um, given, like I said, the candelabra that they gave me and the impact that my lighting Shabbat candles had on them,
Mm.
then I feel like clearly I was doing what I was meant to be doing, and lighting those 6 candles was something that wasn't, even in the toughest times, wasn't for me, but was for them.
Wow, that's beautiful. I mean, so, gi given the challenges that you've shared, how would you say, because when we get married and start a family, we have all kinds of maybe ideas in our head about what it's going to be like or what we're going to be like. And so how would you say these challenges that you've gone through and you can say overcome? given where you are right now to a large extent, like how has that changed your perspective on life
Um,
or shaped your perspective?
I think on a personal level, even though I don't always want to admit it, it's definitely given me a certain strength. Um, I'm going to remind myself of that. I'm thinking as we're going, so I'm going to remind myself of that when I'm, in a puddle of tears. Um, so I think it's given me a certain strength, but I think that I have an understanding of relationships and what I what I want from relationships, whether it's with God or with my children. I'm blessed to have a tremendous relationship with each one of them, um, or with friends. I think that I don't have a lot of time for surface, and I want the real um, the real deal from my relationships with people. Um, and I think that my perspective on gratitude and how important that is. Um, because like I told you that my story with driving, gratitude just changes the whole way you look at every challenge or situation. Um, and sometimes it's really hard when you're in that dark space to have gratitude, but it can be even the simplest things. I have a close friend right now who's going through her own health challenge, and there's frustrations that come with it, there's fears that come with it, and one of the things that I find myself constantly telling her is like small wins, small
Mm.
wins, like just focus on those small wins. Don't worry about the big picture out here, focus on what's right here, and you got a small win right here, that's what we're going to celebrate. um so I think connection, so essentially it goes with relationships, right? Gratitude and celebrating those small wins, and I think ultimately that creates that um anchor of hope, right? So
Beautiful.
we touched on my blog, which I'm so grateful for you, because you are definitely one of my biggest cheerleaders and getting me to push through the perfectionism issues and just getting out there and doing it. Um, and yeah, I think that anchor of hope is really built on gratitude, connection, and what was the third one that I said?
Small wins.
Small wins, thank you. Small wins. Yeah. So, I've had this hashtag, which was before hashtags existed. Um, I used to write on cards. It's now my license plate. It says LYSC, which is love you something crazy. It's just like my own personal, like, wanted to be more than just I love you. So now I have like a string of hashtags when I post on social media about my children, usually. Usually it's about my children, not myself. That's okay. And one of them, in addition to Anchor of Hope, is refuse to sink. And I think that's so poignant. And, you know, um, those ways that we can refuse to sink, or those tools that we can use in refusing to sink, are gratitude, connection, and small wins.
That's fantastic. That's that's great. It's funny because you mentioned refuse to sink and then also anchor of hope, which are like two different poles, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the anchor, it's interesting. I could play with that. So, um, I'm going to ask you a question. Obviously, you can say no to anything that I'm throwing out here, right? But I'm just wondering, given your hard-earned wisdom and lessons and reframe, perspective that you've come out this other side with, and you've now been able to kind of make it explicit for yourself, it sounds like, right? If you could go back to, not go back, but like if you could give something or say something to the old you when you were in the thick of it, you know,
Yeah.
in the light of what you've learned, what would that be if
Mm.
that's a, something to.
You know, my initial thought would be like, you know, Jackie, you can do it. Be the cheerleader. I'm really good on the sidelines of cheerleading. Um, and I'm kind of like baffled that I will even say this to you or think
And
this.
everyone in internet land.
Everyone in Internet, I don't think I'd change it. I don't think I'd change anything. I
Nice
think,
gut stalls.
and why? Because this has all built who I am now, right? It's built the character, the person I am, the friend that I am, the mother that I am. Um, God willing, the inspiration that I am through sharing my story and sharing my blog. Um, I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't go through all of these challenges. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I think that's
So
where I'm
that's really powerful. And I just had this image of like Joseph when he's in jail, right?
at.
In
Right.
Mitzrayim,
Yeah.
biblical Joseph, for those who are familiar, and how he was, when he was finally reunited with his brothers and they felt so bad, and he tells them, it wasn't you who brought me, it wasn't you who sold me, it wasn't you who caused all this, it was God. And so that I could ultimately, the good that came out of him being there. And I'm just thinking of this, like you in that metaphorical prison, right? Or in that dark hole that you were
Sure.
thrown, like if you want to, I don't know why all this Joseph stuff, and then the 7 years of plenty after the 7 years of famine, you're
Wow.
coming up to
What a
7 years.
nice connection.
Any thoughts?
um, yeah, I think I'm a little mind blown. Because I think that one of the things I struggle with still to this day is time and, not necessarily wishing I could do things differently because as difficult as it was or it is to look back at the abuse that I endured, the one thing that I held to through all of it was that it had to happen for me to have my 4 kids. I've said
Mm.
that from the beginning. And so, as much as there's a struggle between me and Jay and our relationship, I had to I had to have that relationship with him, as difficult as it was, in order for me to have my 4 kids, which, if anybody knows me or knows them, they are like absolute my light, my strength, my guide, everything.
That's really powerful, Jackie. I mean, we in Judaism, we talk about how God is the third parent, right? Or the third partner in the creation or the bringing down of the soul into a physical body, born to the parents. And so, we need to have that relationship in order for those four souls to come down. And the souls we're taught choose the parents, right?
Right.
Which is sometimes a very hard thing to wrap your head around or swallow, if you have challenges with parents. But um, that's something I think about sometimes, is like these children, which I don't even, think about them as like they came through me, but they're not mine, right? There's and your kids, they're all right, all of these, everyone, we're all in these individual beings who come through, and how to wrap the head around when they come through a difficult family situation or a parenting situation. And so, for your children, who I'm guessing will listen to this at some point, if you had to venture a spiritual guess as to why they came through, what lessons they had to learn or what they got out of it,
Yeah.
what would they tell you? What do you think they each got out of it coming through you and Jay?
Mm. Well, I'd hope that they would be, I don't know if the word's happy or content. I think they all, let me go back a little bit. I think that they all realized, as hard as this is, and as difficult as it was what they lived through, they've all expressed to me at different periods in their life, because they were all different ages, and it took them all different period of time, that they had to experience this tragedy in their life to get where they are today. So, which is profound, and I think that there's many adults that can't grasp that. And the fact that they were all able to do that in their own way, in relatively a short period of time, while they're still, they were still developing and growing up, I think is huge, and has also allowed them to um, create their own definition of self, right? So we talked about how when he died, I don't want this to define you. It's allowed them to create their own definition of self. So I think that they all have an understanding of their life or their story or their journey, was meant to be the way it is. And I know that they have tremendous gratitude for what I had to endure, and for what I did to raise them the best that I could, given the challenges that I had and the tools that I had. But yeah, I think ultimately, I think my kids, and they express this often, the level of gratitude, um, that they have. Again, I can't really speak for them, so that's a little bit hard, but I know they've also expressed the way I handled life, even in the ugly, messy times, because by no means was I perfect at this. Um, that it was a great, like, inspiration to them. I think we talked about that, need to keep going and to keep moving forward.
Hmm.
um, and I hope they understand the level of gratitude that I have for them, because without them, I don't know that I would have survived all of these challenges.
So if, now that you're again at the place that you're in and you talk to them about, way back, not to let it define them, would you say that you've let it define you and that's shifting?
It makes me think of something, my daughter Aviva, who is a freshman at UNLV, and she's in this scholar program, and a story she told me, or an experience that she told me that was like a little bit mind blowing in this whole, like, don't let it define you mantra, is,
Mm.
when she was interviewing for this scholarship program, they asked her, what was the most defining moment of your life, or I'm paraphrasing, I don't know exactly how they phrased it. And she told them, my mom told me when my dad died that this wasn't supposed to define me. And because that connotation was something that like, it's not supposed, I didn't want what happened to him to negatively define them, but I
Mm-hmm.
didn't use that term negative. But that's what you can, kind of get from that is that the idea is I don't want it to negatively define you, right? But she took it as it 1,000% defined who she is, who she wants to be, what she wants to do with her life. She wants to be a therapist and help kids in they've gone through childhood trauma. And I was just like mind blown because I didn't use that word negative, but it was that connotation. But at the same time, that whole it shouldn't define you. She's right. Like it can define you, but it can define you in a positive way. So, of course the situation is going to define me, there's no way for it not to, but I guess it's the choice that we make on how the tragedies that we go through, the challenges that we go through, how they're going to define you. Um, I think that's the key. So in all of my challenges and my little, like I'm a widow and I'm a this and I'm a that. Yes, it gives them a title, but ultimately it's like, how does that title define me? And I think that goes back to like, just having gratitude for the space that I'm in and what I've lived through, because yes, there's no way for it not to define you. So maybe I need to alter that mantra a little bit moving forward, but there's so many positive ways it can define you. Any
Yeah.
kind of challenge or tragedy.
Well, I think that's such an interesting point, right? Because when you said it, you were thinking originally in terms of like, this won't limit you. This
Right.
doesn't need to mark you. This
Exactly.
doesn't have to constrain you. And
Correct.
yet it can also be an anchor, right? In which, or
Good
maybe not,
pun.
right? It's something that you can then, again, back to this idea of how do we bring the light from the darkness, right? How do we elevate how do we rectify what we're handed, right? Everyone is going through difficulties on whatever level in their lives. And the question to your point is, yes, it doesn't have to define you, right? The victim mentality, constraints, limiting what you're going to be, I'll never be, I could have been a contender, whatever. But, you get to use it as a launch pad, or you get to use it as a framework or a lens to say, how do I make this good? Or how can I help others maybe struggling, right? And one of the things that I learned, and I think I mentioned this actually in my other conversation, and I really need to remember who this teacher is, but this idea of we go through the hard times, the difficulties that we go through in our lives so that we can help others who are struggling with similar or same challenges, right? Which is kind of, now that I'm saying this for the second time on some recording, I think that's really what's, the impetus behind these conversations is, of course, it's not going to look the same, but we all are designed to go through challenges, some more extreme than others, some more visible than others, some more damaging or long-lasting effects than others, right? And then the question is, what do we do to rectify that? How do we, and it involves, like you said, you can't put a time limit on it because, and we can be impatient, like, oh my God, aren't I there already? Or I thought I got it and then something else comes. But like, if we look at them through that lens of gratitude, right? And in Hebrew, we call that hakarat hatov, which literally means to look at the good,
Right.
right? In a situation where it doesn't seem like there's any good. But with time and looking back and seeing how we're forged in that fire, right? Like, it's that stress that creates the diamond. I mean, there's all these metaphors for how pressure brings out the best in people, and you were in this cauldron of challenge on so many levels, but it's brought out so much goodness through your children. And so I want to turn it back to you. Like, you just launched your blog, you're coming on this podcast, so you're going public, you know, however many people that's going to be. But like, how do you now define and use your own words, obviously, but like what I call the truly great life, a truly great life, knowing that that's different for everybody. But what is that? What does a truly great life mean to you, for you as Jackie, not as these kids' mom, right? As
Right.
Jackie.
Right. That's still something that I'm trying to figure out because, we move into this next stage of life as our children are getting older and, having the life of their own, as they should. I'm in that not quite empty nest, but, and how does that look? Um, because so much of, the past 22 years of my life has been their mom and dictated who not who I am, but what I do in each day. Every move that I make is has some realm of whose schedule is this or who needs this or wanting to be available for them or whatever it is. Um, so I'm kind of in that transition period of figuring out who am I now. Um, and so one of the things that I sort of touched on is when I started learning with Judah, that opened up a whole new world that I wasn't ready for. Whatever, it wasn't where I was supposed to be yet, but and that sort of catapulted me into learning more, davening more, praying to God more. Um, this importance of God or Hashem in my life and in my everyday for the good and for the difficult. Um, and I also touched on this feeling of loneliness, and realizing how much that was defining me and how much I hated that it defined me.
Mm,
So what do I do about it? And so this learning has kind of put me into a spot of now I was going to like these Zoom classes. And I sort of touched on how before Jay died, he had isolated us from our community. Like really, I hadn't been part of the community in 10 years.
mm,
And I finally, a few months ago, went back to synagogue, which was huge and difficult and overwhelming and great all at the same time. Um, and so I think being where I am right now in this transition period, I think the truly great life is one of connection. And whether that's connection to God or connection to your community or your friends or your children, um, something I did, I don't even think I thought about it. I think I was not thinking about it on this big level when I did it, but I think it grew out of my need for connection and to combat that loneliness is in 2021, I started sending what I call the Shabbat text. And it started with just a graphic that like a stock photo, whatever. And then it sort of morphed into um, I would send a Shabbat text every week to a handful of people. And then I would sometimes use photographs. My daughter Aviva is a professional photographer, so some of them are pretty
right.
good. I'd use some of her photographs, always giving photo credit. And then I started taking pictures of the world around me. We live in Las Vegas. I've come to realize that our landscape is a different beautiful painting that Hashem gives us every single day.
Mm,
And to be just in awe of that. So whether it's palm trees or the blue sky in the middle of December or the, snow on the mountains when it's like 60 degrees out or 70 degrees out, whatever it is. And I would send these Shabbat texts. I actually counted, somebody asked me how many people I send it to. People often think that I send it as a mass text, and I don't. I send them each individually because I want to think about that person. This is again going to that concept of connection. I want to think about that person, or if somebody wasn't feeling well that week, I can also add like, how are you feeling, or whatever it is. I send 200 texts now. So
One
it
by
took
one.
one
I'm
by
one of those
one.
recipients and I love it. I remember one time you sent one late. I was like, "Where's my are you okay? I didn't get my text yet. It's almost Shabbat." Like
I've gotten that through my cancer surgeries, through everything. That's something that I've also stayed really committed to, and I think that I really believe that that was a way, I didn't even realize it at the time, but a way to combat my loneliness was to make that connection. And I've heard beautiful stories. Like I have some people that will now try and text me before I text them. I have one friend that doesn't necessarily keep Shabbat, but she sends it to a handful of her friends. And like how beautiful is that, right? So
it's
um
beautiful.
so and where I grew to 2000 to 200 is now I've gotten back into community and seeing people, whether they're old friends or new friends, and I add them to my Shabbat text. And I think it's really had a tremendous impact, not just on me. Um, and yeah, so I think getting back to truly great life, I think ultimately connection. Also something I learned this week, I'm going to be doing what's called the happiness challenge through Aish and Partners in Torah this week. And one of the quotes from the learning that we're doing is happiness is a state of mind.
Hmm.
And I was like, ooh, that
Yes, it
one's
is.
powerful. Like we get to choose our happiness. Which gets back to like appreciating, celebrating those wins, having gratitude, and connection.
It's beautiful. I'll just throw in there. I remember watching a documentary years ago, and I think the research shows that happiness is like 50% genetically determined. Like there is a genetic component to how positively, however you want to define happiness, right? Which is a loaded word, but there's a genetic component, which
Mhm.
some people are wired to be happier or more positive than others, right? But there's I think it's almost equal, if not more, environmental component, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about is you've created this environment of connection. And it's so interesting because you were in a connection and then you were in an isolation, right? So you lived, how many years was that where it was isolation and then you just you didn't re-engage until
Um,
recently? So how many years was that?
10 years.
Yeah, so that's a long time with the kids of everything going on, but also this not being connected, right? Not being connected and now it almost seems like you made the decision to be connected, right? And to reach out to people and to create connection and people are paying it forward and it's just there's like no barrier, right? Like you said, you just started going back to synagogue after years and it was scary and of course all the feelings and the anxiety that comes up with going back into a place and whatever what people think or however it is but it was also a connect now there's connection there like you keep it wasn't a one-time deal you
No.
kept going yeah
Yeah.
so to people who are afraid of making connections or who think that past circumstances dictate their ability to make new connections or to re-enter a community or to like what would you say to people who feel like well this happened so no or because you're a living example of a change like that.
Yeah.
Maybe not that but like you made a decision to re-enter to connect and very quickly relatively speaking you're in
Right.
you're connected.
Right. Right. I think a couple things. I think, that social anxiety is tremendous, right? What are people saying? Um, and I think probably in, the immediate future of something that happens, there probably is a lot of talk and what have you. Um, but just I think once I re-entered and there were some people from the past, but there was really many more new people, so they don't really know what my story is, or, what have you. And it's been somewhat like refreshing. And, I even had somebody in synagogue that I met that's lived here for about 5 years, and she was like, "Oh, I've never seen you before. How long have you lived here?" And I'm like, 17 years. And she was like, "And I've never met you before?" And that could really, like, throw somebody off, especially when
Mhm.
they're still trying to navigate these waters. And the person I was standing with was like, "Well, she's here now." And it
Yeah.
was so comforting, like, having that support. Um, so it's still a work in progress. There's still things that are, a little bit uncomfy. And I think some conversations that need to be had with some of the people of the past.
Okay.
Not for any, not because of any animosity, but just to have a common understanding. Um, but I think one of the things I say is, like, give yourself grace. So, maybe put yourself out there in that situation, and if it's upsetting, that's okay. Um, there have definitely been times where I've walked out and um, walked home crying, and that's okay. I think um, one of the things that so many people struggle with is sitting in your emotions. Um, this is going to be emotional, you know, um, re-entering a world that triggers so much. One of the things I still struggle with, and I'm not sure how to manage it. There is no way for me to walk into a situation, especially one where there's people of old or people of new, where it doesn't come up that I'm a widow. So whether it's a matter
Mm.
of, people that knew my family from then, or knew, Jay, or knew of our relationship or whatever, or new people, that you're meeting, it always comes up. And something that I'm trying to work on is figuring out who I am and having my own identity that's not connected, in that way. Um, and that's largely a very big work in progress.
Yeah. No, it's
And so I don't have all the answers for that. I think not being tough on yourself about time, giving yourself grace when you're in that situation, or that moment. It's not always going to be uncomfortable, and learning to work through the emotion, allowing yourself to have the emotion.
yeah. That's good words of wisdom. Um, to the point of, it's a work in progress figuring out, who you are aside from the history, right, or the story of the relationship. Where how can Aviva's words of wisdom in her answer of course it defines me, and then using it for something that's totally her, right? To pursue therapy, to
Right.
be a therapist,
Right.
to work with people. How can that, do you see a parallel or a potential of borrowing that for you in your situation as you figure out what you want to do?
For sure. I think this, finally, launching this blog, and in my connection, um, sharing my story, and um, hopefully giving that strength um, to others. I always knew that I wasn't living these challenges and situations just for myself. I always,
Mm,
knew that there would be a part of me that would want to help others. I was always not quiet about it either. Like, not that I, gangbusters, but I would say maybe not quiet is the right word. I wasn't shy about it. I share. I'm very open about the fact that Jay committed suicide. I don't, I don't dance around that. I've never done that with my kids. I've never done that with anybody, because I think that being honest about those challenges, even, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I shared that with people because I felt like ultimately there would be a space to be able to help somebody else. Um, and so I think this blog is just hopefully just the small step towards something bigger, but in that my story, the things that I've learned, the strength that I can give, um, could help others in the challenges that they face. Not necessarily the same challenges, but just any type of challenges. And I can be that cheerleader. I can um, remind that friend of the small wins. I can be that hug when somebody's in a space that's uncomfortable. And needs that um, sense of connection.
So I was just gonna like to tie it back to what you said before about the loneliness. Is there a possibility that this is about, you know, you helping to make that connection for people who are sitting in their loneliness in whatever their situation is, because you understand that loneliness, right? On such
Right.
a level. Um, yeah.
For sure. I That loneliness is hard, and I don't want anybody else to have to endure it. Um, so yeah, absolutely.
Although I'm going to push back now because you wouldn't change a thing, right? So maybe it's a reframe
Right,
when you're in
right.
the loneliness to hold on to the idea, even if you can't. It's so hard to imagine the future when you're in it, right? It's so hard to imagine, but like to to allow for the possibility that, in Hebrew we say Gam ze ya'avor, from the Solomon's words of this too shall pass.
Yeah. So maybe it's the connection that helps them pull them out of the loneliness.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that will get strength from your story and your example and your wisdom and your learnings. And are there any last thoughts that I know we covered a lot? Are there any last thoughts you'd want to share?
Um, it's not something that like you can necessarily think when you're in the moment, but ultimately we're all given the challenges that we face for a reason. Um, and uh it's important to understand that as hard as they are, there will be growth that comes from it. And with that growth, um, if you so desire, you could also help inspire others, and I don't think that needs to be like I'm doing this today so that I can inspire this. I think that it's a natural inspiration um, that we can give um, when we're working through our own challenges and our own growth from those challenges. Um, so I think that would be, you know,
Yeah, it's reminding me that, if we have this belief that all is one ultimately, right? Ein od
right,
milvado, like there is nothing but God and God is one and we're part of that oneness.
right,
Then when like a part of us is hurting, right? We want to heal, right? We want to heal. So it's maybe that's also why some people go through certain kinds of challenges while others go through different kind of challenges or none at all, and it's just different cells in the body or different parts of the body that, so we get to heal. So it's within that struggle and that pain that the potential to help others can come through.
right,
And again, it's all predicated, at least for me, and it sounds like for you, on this idea of God, right? Because if we don't believe in any kind of higher power or like greater purpose or or anything like that, then like it's just suffering, right? And then
right,
why me? And the because I know
right,
for with whatever I struggled with before I came to a relationship with God, it was very much blame or victim mentality or not understanding and or this kind of like nothing makes sense, so what does it matter?
Right. So one of the things I learned when you say the word suffering is um, suffering, just like happiness, is a choice.
Yes.
The pain is real, right?
Yeah.
The pain, the challenge, that's real. But how you react to that pain or challenge, that's where you get to choose.
Right. That is the choice, right?
Yeah.
And the meaning we ascribe things. Now, I wish I could quote Viktor Frankl, but I'm not remembering it. But like between stimulus and response, there's a space, and that in that space is choice. And then another wisdom that I learned from one of my teachers is that consciousness equals choice. So the problem is that when we're not conscious of what we're in, or if we're in survival mode. Anyways, we could like have a part two here and then like go down a lot of rabbit holes. But Jackie, thank you so much. If people want to follow your blog or connect with you, we'll put all this in the notes. But what is the best way for people to follow you, reach you, connect with you? Connection.
Right. So you can subscribe to my blog on anchorofhope.blog. Um, and I also, you can email me at Jackie Hafter at anchorofhope.blog. Or you can find me on Instagram, very new in the works, but it is there in Instagram at Anchor of Hope blog. No dot.
Beautiful. Awesome. Jackie, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, we're almost at 2 hours.
Wow.
Amazing.
Like our first conversation, it was like 4 hours and we hadn't even met each other in person yet.
I know. I know, but this is for everyone to be part of. So hopefully people are feeling the connection and getting something really helpful and I know I'm inspired. So um I'm grateful for you. So thank you for having this conversation with me.
The feeling is mutual. The feeling is mutual. The gratitude is. Thank you
Thanks,
for having
Jackie. All right, take care. I'll talk to you later. Bye, everybody.
me.
Hey guys, so are you inspired? I know I was extremely inspired by Jackie and her story, and I hope that hearing it from her gave you some encouragement and some inspiration and some comfort, maybe. And if you know someone who may need to hear her message of hope that you think could benefit from listening to this conversation, please share it with them. And please visit her website and you can be in touch with her that way. I'm going to include all of that in the conversation description. And again, this is all about bringing voices that really need to be heard and want to be heard on a more public level, of people who have taken that road less traveled, have made changes, have gone through difficulties, whatever it is, and yet have held to that vision, even if they're still figuring it out, of what a truly great life looks like for them. So if you want to come on, be in touch. If you know someone that might be interested, put them in touch. trulygreatlife.com. Thanks again, and see you next time.